I am Anna Seewald, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about growing ourselves while raising our children. I'm a psychologist, educator, and parent coach. And on this podcast, I explore how you can connect to your authentic self, practice radical self-care, and raise emotionally healthy children. Let's break the cycle of generational trauma for a more peaceful, kind, and compassionate world. Today, the family dynamic, the journey into the mystery of sibling success. Before we dive into today's episode, I have a quick and exciting announcement. The podcast is turning 10 years old in August. What a milestone! Yay! We want to celebrate in a meaningful and memorable way. Over the years, many of you have asked about the longer retreat or destination gathering. We've done several live events over the years, including our sold-out one-day conference in New Brunswick, New Jersey back in 2019. And just last year, we hosted not one, but two successful live podcast events. So for our 10th anniversary, we are dreaming big. A destination retreat and maybe more, from a live podcast recording to a one-day gathering or even a multi-day retreat. There are a few ideas floating around and we would love to gauge interest. So for that, we have created a short interest form to help us plan. Please take a moment to fill out that quick form to say, keep me posted. This is not a commitment or reservation, just a way to raise your hand and stay in the loop as plans unfold. Thanks for being part of this journey. I cannot wait to see what we create together next. Today's topic is really fascinating and fun. I am speaking with Susan Dominus. She has worked for the New York Times since 2007. First as a Metro columnist and then as staff writer for the New York Times Magazine. In 2018, she was part of a team that won a Pulitzer Prize for public service for its reporting on workplace sexual harassment. She won a front page award from the Newswomen's Club of New York and Reverend Michael Judge Hart of New York Award from the New York Press Club. She has studied as a fellow at the National Institutes of Health in Yale Law School. Her article about menopause in the New York Times Magazine won a National Magazine Award in 2024. She teaches journalism at Yale University, and she has a new book. It's called The Family Dynamic, a journey into the mystery of sibling success. I think the title of this book is self-explanatory, and I really don't need to introduce you to the topic, but I wanted to say that Dominus profiles 6 remarkable families whose children dreamed big and succeeded, sometimes in wildly varied fields, and she chose very diverse families. We talk about the value of family culture, the family mottos or messages children internalize, the role of siblings in each other's success, the expectations parents set for their children, and so much more. I hope you'll enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Thank you for listening. Well, Susan, I am so delighted to have you on the podcast. It's really an honor. And it's such an interesting, phenomenal book and research. What I want to know is, what ideas did you went into this project of so many years, and what ideas you walked away with?
So I went into this book because I was interested in finding out whether there were things that parents were doing in their family lives that were creating these kinds of consistencies among siblings who all achieved at a very high level, rather than just having one child who might have just been an exceptional talent or an outlier. And I went into the book thinking that I was going to find some really easy answers, and there were going to be these common threads among the families or really specific pieces of advice that the parents had. And what I ended up finding were instead these really complex, nuanced, intimate stories of fascinating families. And I would say that each family, the mechanisms were pretty idiosyncratic. And sometimes it was hard to put your finger on it. And sometimes it was much more about the siblings than the parents themselves. Sometimes it was about the interaction between expectations the parents set and then the way the siblings helped each other along. So it was a much more complicated story. And I think it made for actually much more rich, complex stories that get at the messiness and the beauty of family lives.
Yeah. If you were to write like another book right now after this one, what would the path or the theme topic be based on what you learned or maybe want to cover more or get into?
Well, it's funny. This is not a book that I want to write, but in most of the families that I wrote about, there was some kind of symbiotic relationship among the siblings. And I think that that is because you don't see siblings, especially from disadvantaged backgrounds, all succeeding at a high level unless they have some special advantage. And often the siblings are the special advantage. But a lot of people have written to me since the book was excerpted in the New York Times Magazine to say that their sibling relationships were really formative because they were so painful. And I don't want to write that book. I don't necessarily want to live in that headspace, but I think that there is probably important research to be done about that as well.
Yeah, I think the siblings reading your book and thinking about the topics that you write in the book, I read the book not as a parent, but as a person who was parented and who was raised a certain way. And the siblings topic immediately, resonated with me because my sibling has been an instrumental influence for me. And I'm positive he can say the same thing about me. I'm older, but we have gone through trauma and a lot of hardship together. But I think the reason that I live my life today, in the United States is because of my sibling, because he showed the path, what's possible. And he inspired me, with his actions. And we both applied to the same scholarship. We got the same scholarships. It's like, I guess you can say we were high achievers, according to your book and definitions. And I also come from a family, I also want to throw in the cousins' influences. Like my cousins we have a lot of them, and they're all high achieving. And so there's something to be said about that as an asset. But I want to go to your story a little bit when you were, when your parents would travel and you would visit this particular family and stay with them. Tell me a little bit about that and what was it like to live in someone else's family and what did you observe?
Well, this was a family, very cultured, educated parents who were close friends of my own parents. And the dinner table experience there was really different from mine in that, I mean, first of all, the meal was a little bit more elegant and there was wine served with dinner. And then the father would always turn to the sons at some point in the meal and just say, "So, Daniel, a plane is leaving Albuquerque flying X number of miles an hour." And then he would create this very elaborate calculus problem that the kid was supposed to solve in his head on the spot, or they would talk about current events and, the topics of the day. And I just loved it. I was so into it until the moment when the father turned to me and said, "So, Susie, a plane is leaving New York City flying." And I burst into tears, but I did go home to my own family realizing, oh, in some families, like enrichment is part of the daily conversation. And it both created like an expectation that I both wished that I had that in my own family, but was also relieved that I didn't have that in my own family. And it was something I saw a lot when I went to Yale with a lot of kids who came from very academic households, where again, a lot of them grew up with, like my college roommate, grew up with famous authors around the dinner table because of who her father was. And she had a lot of very successful people in her family. And I always thought, wow, is that exciting because it makes you feel like you can do anything? Or is it a burden? Because then if you don't achieve at their level, you're disappointed. And I really wrestled with the pros and cons of those kinds of exposures and expectations.
Yeah, I can see that. So yeah, the environment plays a huge role. Right, and the family culture plays a big role. It seems like those people were doing that naturally, right? And one thing I wanted to bring up to you is I feel like who we are and how we live our life has more influence on our kids than what we teach them, how we enrich them, and what the agenda and the things that we want to do with them. Because we live our values ultimately, right? And you write about that. It is about, it's not like you sit down and teach a certain value by lecture. You live that value. And so they internalize that from a very young age.
Yeah, I think that's true. And you also, I think there's just, so many doctors' kids end up wanting to be doctors because they see that it's so valued in the community. My two sons grew up with two parents who were both journalists, and they both talk about how that's appealing to them. But I always think it's really, maybe it's less than that it's sort of innately even the right career for them, but they just understand it. They know what that looks like and how do you do it and what are the rewards of it and what are the sacrifices. They know they can wrap their brains around it. So it's not like we've ever said to them, like, this is a great profession and we hope that you'll follow our paths. Quite the contrary, actually. But it just feels like something that's familiar to them.
Yeah, that's true. And sometimes children actually do things in opposition to their parents, right? Sometimes they follow their footsteps for several reasons, and sometimes they do the opposite. This is such an interesting and rich topic. It's fascinating, but you write about, parental patterns, right? The Profile 6 families and the themes that emerge, the common themes about the type of parent. I want to ask you about that. What did you observe? Like the thwarted parents and the overcomers?
Yeah, one of the things that I saw in a lot of these families, I think it's also because a lot of the families I wrote about were raising kids in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s. Women didn't really have a lot of opportunity back then. And so there were a lot of women who I call thwarted parents, women who wanted to be dancers, like the mother of the Wasserstein siblings, or Janine Groff, who wanted to be a doctor and just didn't have the support to make that happen, even though she clearly had the talent. And so I think sometimes the energy that they had was sort of channeled into their children, and the children picked up where they left off. I mean, a more positive way to look at it, I guess, is this concept of the finishing child. Tony Kushner, the playwright's mother, was this extraordinary actress and musician who basically only operated at the community level because she left everything to raise her children. And I think Tony got a lot of his energy in bringing his mother joy in his own success. From our conversations and other articles that I've read, his mother was definitely a thwarted parent. A lot of the parents were also overcomers. In other words, they were extraordinary in their own right in ways that didn't necessarily make them famous, but they had, let's say, immigrated from China to Appalachia and built a life for themselves there. Or they had, the father of the Holofields, who were these civil rights activists, had traveled from his childhood home in Mississippi at the age of 14 to go try to get a high school education in Alabama at Tuskegee, and took like 16 years to graduate from high school and college because he alternated years of school with years of farming to make enough money to survive. So their parents had done these extraordinary things that didn't make them famous, but they saw the toughness that they came from, and they saw that they could endure. And I think their parents inspired them, and they wanted to live up to their parents' legacies a lot of the time.
Yeah, I love that. I really do. It resonates with me a lot. You also, I love how you talk about the Bronte family. What is your fascination with them and how you incorporate it into the book? I really enjoyed that part as well.
Oh, I'm so glad. So, as I said, I was obsessed with these family cultures when I was a kid. It wasn't just the family friends of ours, it was also the Kennedy family. I loved reading about their rituals and their competitions and their dinner table expectations. And I loved reading the Bronte novels, but I was also really, really interested in the Brontes themselves because, if you read Emily, Anne, and Charlotte's fiction, it's also different, but it's all groundbreaking in its own way. They were women writing at a time when women novelists were still, kind of new to the world. And I just couldn't imagine what was going on in their home environment that allowed for that. And what I found was, among other things, their father was an overcomer. He was people think of the Brontes as the most quintessentially English family ever. And yet their father immigrated from Ireland at a time when he made a leap from, borderline poverty. His parents probably never went to high school. He got a scholarship to Cambridge. So he was in his own way clearly extraordinary. And also, they had this sibling effect that I saw elsewhere in the book, which is that it's not like they were all independently writing in their rooms secretly. Like they were reading each other's work and they were talking about it and even professionally collaborating. I mean, Charlotte basically came to her sisters and said, if you give me some of your work, we can publish a collection of poetry. And she whipped them into shape and kind of made that happen. And if she hadn't had that ambition, Emily Bronte's would have sat in her desk, forever and disappeared. But Charlotte really made that happen for her siblings.
Are you looking for personalized support on your parenting journey? I offer one-on-one coaching tailored to your needs, including court-ordered parenting classes and co-parenting counseling. These services are available to anyone, no matter where you live, whether in the United States or abroad. As a special thank you to my listeners, you can enjoy 10% off all coaching packages. Visit AuthenticParenting.com to learn more about my services and how we can work together to achieve your parenting goals. And they were young. They were quite young, right?
Yes, and they started writing for fun. I mean, this is very famous. They used to create these incredibly elaborate, Byronic universes with, characters and travails and adventures. And then they started newspapers that were about these lands that they'd created, and they would have editorials and opinions. And they were just wildly brilliant for sure. And they had this like network effect where they were all influencing each other and all encouraging each other. And they lived in the world of their collective imagination. Charlotte Bronte talked about being off. I think she was a governess or teaching at a school. And she got a letter from her brother about the land that they'd created. And it was an update of what was going on. And she said, I could have feasted on it for days, I think, something like that. So
yeah, and I know it's fascinating. I mean, growing up, having read Jane Eyre and all of that, it's like, it's very, dear to my heart, the Bronte story. And I think parents give themselves so much credit for everything. And they also blame themselves for everything. I feel like we overestimate how much power or influence we have over our kids and sort of underestimate the other influences, and I came to this realization because of my life experiences, and I don't want to go into detail, but obviously you don't know. So I grew up basically, before 8-13, everything was great. But then the earthquake happened. I lost my mom, lost everything. It was never the same. And, like basically I was not parented, right? After that, I became the parent. And so siblings, we were very close. But because of that autonomy and the freedom that I had, you can call it neglect in some ways, but I see it as autonomy, as independence, as making decisions and all of that. There's so much upside to that. I recognize that, that pushed me to succeed. It was like, yes, of course, our parents influenced us. And in before 13, I was shaped, and my father shaped us even after that. Even his influence still lives on, even when they're not with us, right? So your parents do influence. I don't want to say that there is no influence, but I feel like we put so much overemphasis on how much we influence our kids that we sort of underestimate what other influences are there. And so I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, behavioral geneticists look at twin studies and come to the same conclusion. They basically find that, fraternal twins raised in the same home, what makes them more similar? Not much. They're very different people and they're raised by the same parents. I mean, I see this in my own kids. We read them the same books and we told them the same stories and we had the same household rules, and they came out really different and they stayed really different. So the environment plays a huge role, but parenting is just one tiny part of the environment. What is parenting in the face of an earthquake when you think about it in a way? And so I think that parents do, and not just an earthquake, but everything else that happens, something hurtful that somebody says at school to, to a child, or the teacher that your kid has. Everything. Is their bedroom sunny or not? Did they break their leg in fourth grade? Every person has this idiosyncratic infinite succession of micro events that interact with who they are in the first place to create a new person every day in a way. So parenting effects matter for sure, but they matter less than we think that they do. And that's what research tells us. And I think we Sibling effects are also small in the face of all the other environmental effects of the world, but I think that we do underestimate those effects, whereas we overestimate parental effects.
Yeah, say more a little bit about the sibling effect and what you observe in specific families in the book that, the Chan family specifically.
Oh, the Chen family. Yeah. I mean, basically, what you see in the Chen family is, well, first of all, the oldest sister was because she came to China as a child and didn't speak any English, they held her back, not just one, but two grades. So she was quite a bit older than her classmates. And we know that when kids are old for their grade, they tend actually to do better because they're more developmentally advanced and because they have more kind of frontal lobe development. And so teachers like them better and school's a more positive experience. And that often tends to trickle down. There's been research that finds that when kids are old for their grade, their younger siblings, regardless of whether they're old for their grade or not, also do better. So we know that it's the sibling that is accounting for some of those correlations in grades between siblings rather than something that the parents are doing to make them both similar. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
It's a really interesting study by Emma Zhang at Yale, and I talk about it a lot because it's a really good controlled study. There's this element of randomness that just when is the older sibling's birthday. So they have this oldest sister who excelled in school. Parents were too busy working really to, force grades or help them. They didn't understand which AP classes their children should take. And each of the older siblings really pulled the other one in a very concerted way. One of the brothers was this tremendous wrestler, and he really wanted his younger brother to be even better than he was. And so he trained him personally on the wrestling mat. And when their youngest sibling was applying to colleges, the older siblings had already left the house. Each of them took a different aspect of the college application to help him through it. And they were so worried that he wasn't being stimulated by siblings the way they had been that they formed a book club. And they would call from all over America to discuss a book that they had assigned him to make sure he was benefiting from the enrichment of the siblings around him.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. Of course, I mean, we can talk about the negative effects of siblings as well, but that's
Yeah.
not what the book is about. I think another fascinating theme that you sort of, highlight in the book is the parental expectations. I really want to talk about this. Do we set expectations? How big, how small, how much should we push our children? How much should we interfere? I think it's a question many parents grapple with, and there is no right answer. But say more about what you learned about expectations.
I think the way to think about expectations is a way of thinking about child rearing in general that all boils down to the same idea, which is that you have to know your child. I've had parents come to me and say, I don't understand. I set the same high expectations for both of my children, and it worked for one of them and not the other. And, I kind of want to be the parent who wants to break it to them. Both your children do not necessarily have the same academic ability, and all of your expectation setting in the world isn't necessarily going to get results from us. Now, we do know that expectations from parents do help and they can help students perform better, but they have to be right-sized to the child because we also know that when parents have kind of airy-fairy aspirational goals that really surpass their children's abilities, then that can be detrimental. It can be demotivating for children, and it can also have dangerous effects on their mental health.
Absolutely. I agree. That's why it's such a tricky area. But I think what you're saying is the truth. And I want to emphasize that, you have to know your individual child, their sensitivities, their temperament, their strengths and weaknesses, honoring that is, of course, it would be easy to have this one size approach. If you have multiple kids, life will be a lot easier. But if you have you have to approach them individually. And this is why it's hard having multiple kids. Like you are in a relationship with each and every one of them, and they're very unique. So the goals, the way you talk to them, the way you approach them is so different. That's why it's taxing and exhausting.
It's hard.
It's hard.
There's this one study that I love that basically was trying to figure out how could parents encourage kids to take more STEM classes? Because as we know, when kids stop taking math at a certain level, they've closed off, so many fields that they might want to enter down the road. Like if you don't take calculus in 11th grade, if you decide you want to be a biochem major when you get to college, you've got a lot of catch up to do. So, but we also know from research that when kids say to their parents, why should I take algebra? I'm never going to use it. Parents don't have really good answers. So what this study did was it sent website links and pamphlets to a subset of a larger group of parents. And the pamphlets gave parents examples of things they could say to encourage their kids to take, let's say, math. So if your kid's really interested in getting like a cheaper phone plan, you can say, well, if you're really comfortable using math, you're going to be better at getting a better deal on your phone. Or if your kid wants to be a professional soccer player, you can say, okay, well, when you're making all that money, you're going to want to be sure that you can manage it really well. And the more math practice you have now, the better. But what it boils down to is finding something that the kid values, not that you value, but that the kid values. And that's about knowing your kid and connecting the motivation to something specific about your child. So once again, we end up with how knowing your own child and reflecting back to them that you know them is helpful. It's hard to move the needle with your kid, right? And it could involve very expensive tutoring, or it could involve just resources that, not everybody has. But this is simple. And so I wish that they could scale up this little training in a massive way. It seems like it should be, easily available in schools to do parent education, something like that.
Yeah. Well, from my own parenting, I have only one child, so I don't have the sibling comparison studies here, but I think knowing my kid is huge, and knowing how to approach her. Obviously, she's 17. I would never say you have to do this, you have to do that. I've always been this like questioning parent. What do you think about that? Do you think you did your best? Like, what is your more open-ended exploratory questions so that they themselves can evaluate their effort, and I can see how that paid off. There's this like collaborative thinking and supportive approach, but not do as I say, and this is the way I have this expectation type of way, which is more rigid. And helping kids set expectations for themselves, right? It's not only about us, it's like, who does it serve? I mean, this is a whole different thing. But we have to, see who the child is in front of us. I feel like that's so important. How do they receive feedback? How do we give feedback? And it's important to give feedback. Sometimes parents they don't want to quote unquote harm their children about a performance or an achievement or something like that. But, they want to hear from us, but not in a way, like in a top-down way, right? In a more supportive way. Definitely, we have more experience and more wisdom. I think we can share and give feedback about certain things, but we want them to develop their own thinking and opinion about their own performance. I remember an incident when my daughter was little and she was doing piano and she played at the recital. We came home and my husband said, "Bravo, you did so well. I'm so proud of you. Excellent." And she said, "No, I made 3 mistakes." And she knows that she made mistakes. That's not the best performance. And, my questioning was a little different. It's it's how we are and how we talk to them and the tone, who we are. It's so huge. There's so many nuanced factors that are not even visible that influence our kids.
Yeah, I mean, one of the mothers who I found most inspiring in the book is the mother. She was an overcomer herself. Her name was Teruko Paulus. She'd been orphaned in Japan at the close of World War II and ended up marrying an American GI and raising 3 kids, one of whom danced with the American Ballet Theater when she was very young. And then that same dancer grew up to be Diane Paulus, who was this really innovative and unusually successful female director. She was, one of the first women to win a Tony Award. And she said that her mother used to come to each one of her ballet performances when she was a child, but she didn't offer feedback. She didn't offer critiques. Diane said that her mother had a way of watching without desire.
Yeah, I immediately felt deflated when you said that.
Oh, no, I think that's beautiful.
That's a good thing?
Well, I think, in other words, she did not have desire. She did not have needs that had to be satisfied. It wasn't that she didn't want to be there. She wanted to be there. She wanted to be there. But she didn't have needs that Diane had to satisfy with her own performance.
Oh, I see. I see. Yeah, that's different.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you're talking about the feedback that you give your kid, I think it's very much about following their lead. What do they seem like they want to hear? I think very few kids after a soccer game really want to hear their parents blow by blow about we all know there's language we've been given. I love watching you play. That's another way of saying, I'm watching without desire. I don't need you to win. I don't need you to make me look good. I just need you to know I'm there for you, and I talk a lot about what I gleaned from a lot of the reporting I did for this book was the idea of letting the coach and letting the ballet instructor be the teacher and letting the home environment be a safe place. I mean, I didn't include this in the book, but when people ask me what I took away from all my reporting, Marilyn Hollifield, went on to be this like profound civil rights activist who revered her parents, once told me that she played piano very seriously as a young woman, and that her mom would sometimes just drift into the living room and sit there quietly with her eyes closed, listening. And it was not unlike Taruko Paulus, because her mother never said to her, I think you could pick it up a little bit, or more feeling, darling. Her mother just enjoyed it. And my son plays piano. And what I try to do is just sometimes go there and just sit and enjoy it. And I think I've done it enough now that he knows that I'm not going to give him feedback. I'm not there to judge. And it's a really beautiful moment. I'll remember it. I hope he remembers those moments the way that Marilyn remembers it with her mother.
Yeah. Well, he receives a feedback that you enjoy it. I think that's also feedback. That's what I mean. Feedback doesn't mean like, oh, let me critique what you did. This is how you should do it. But I think you should show your support.
That I agree. Support, which is different from, I think support without the expectation of a certain level of performance that, again, it's not to gratify you, it's you're enjoying their enjoyment. I think Diane Paul's mother was enjoying her daughter's enjoyment of the ballet, and I'm trying to enjoy Leo's enjoyment as well.
Yeah, you delight in that experience, and it's the best feedback.
Yeah.
Like how we read your book and we delight in the hard work that you've done.
Thank you.
That's the best feedback for you.
I appreciate it. I do think that it's just funny because it was only recently that I remembered. It's such a small thing, but that's the one practice that I do engage in now, that I took directly from my reporting.
Oh, that's so sweet. I love that. You know what I liked about those families? The mottos, like the direct and indirect little sayings, pithy sayings that those families had, set the tone and sort of culture in their families. Say, some of those statements and give a little more background.
Yeah, so I myself am really interested in family mottos because the families I reported on did seem to have a lot of mottos and they were kind of consistent. So in the Hollifield family, Marilyn Hollifield told me that the ethos in her family, which was a family of overcomers, was all things possible. Or she said things like, about her parents, fear was not their thing. So I was very interested in families where there was like a culture of boldness, and a sense of possibility. And the Murguias were also this Latino and Mexican American family in Kansas City, Kansas, the four youngest of whom really all reached some kind of national prominence. And they said that their mother used to say, with God's help, all things are possible, remarkably similar. And so I thought about it a lot. And I feel like the ideal message for kids, not that I've managed to pull this off, is, listen, all things possible. Like you want to shoot for the moon, it's there for you. We'll support you and we believe in you. While also somehow conveying, if you don't want to shoot for the moon, that's okay too. You don't have to. We don't need you to do that. But don't let anything hold you back. Don't let, my colleague Jodi Kantor gave this incredible commencement speech at Columbia. And her message was like, people are always going to tell you why you can't do something. It's too risky. The field is dying. There's not enough opportunity. And she basically was saying, you're young. What do you have to lose? Believe in yourself, bet on yourself. And I think she's a very brave person and it's reflected in her reporting and the work that she's done. And she left law school to become a journalist. She took it's a much riskier field, but she believed in herself. And I love that message, bet on yourself. I do love that.
Yeah, I do love that too. But I also like how you are bringing it, it's rooted in reality. Because if a child is not succeeding academically, they're struggling, they have, mental health challenges and things like that. And you sort of come at them and say, shoot for the moon, go for the star, apply to Ivy League schools and things like that. That's not going to be so helpful. Obviously, you have to craft and tailor your message to your kid, right? Understanding who they are, where they are, what they're capable of. I feel like that should be rooted in reality. But I know one family, as I was reading the mottos, I know one family who instilled a different kind of motto, a more of a sort of fear-based and negative, because that's also possible, right? Like the messages we hear directly or indirectly shape us and influence us.
What was the motto?
So this family's motto, and I was reflecting on how they are achieving or not achieving things and how small or big they played in life was hope for the best, expect the worst. So imagine like how terrible that is.
Oh, that's totally my family. That's totally my family. In fact, I always joke that my family motto was if the one thing I heard my father say consistently was, if something seems too good to be true, it usually is, which
Oh.
also kind of negative, but by the way, perfect language to breed a journalist, right? Somebody whose job it is to be skeptical of something that seems too good to be true. But I will be honest that, one of the reasons I was interested in these families is because I grew up very much in a hope for the best, expect the worst kind of family, which I think is true of many, people whose families came to this country because they were fleeing persecution. On the one hand, some of those stories are incredibly inspiring. On the other hand, things can really go wrong in the most profound, dark way. So they're fearful. They don't want you to get too like they don't want your life to be too cushy. They want you to be tough. So that's another way of looking at it, I guess. And I think encouraging kids to be tough is really healthy, actually. But I think I was interested in families that did not have that negative side of the coin and were just optimistic. I mean, optimism was a really big theme in a lot of these families, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. That positivity that I believe in you, that boldness, that's creating space for creativity to blossom and the kids follow their curiosity and you holding, expectations, pushing them, but not too much and considering who they are as people. I mean, exposing them to different individuals who also can influence your children. Like I have a large friend group and they're, high achieving people, doctors and lawyers and things of this nature. So when my daughter enjoys coming to parties with me, like most teenagers don't go with their parents, but my daughter enjoys my friend's company because they take her seriously, number one. And she sees these people and she learns things from them. And every time we come, she has a new insight about life, achievement, happiness, business, and things like that. Like we can't just shelter our kids and hope to be the only influence. I think I love what you're saying. Let's expose them to different influences, coaches, teachers, camps.
But family, friends too. Like not everybody can afford, the best ballet school in New York City, but you can afford. I have a neighbor whom I admire. I'm going to send you over there to mow their lawn and like have a cup of lemonade with them. I mean, maybe that's idealistic, but I think I think that there are community members, there are family members, uncles, distant cousins, that kind of thing. If people can just have their kid be in the environment of people whom they admire, let them be role models. It's hard to be a role model as a parent. It's very unusual.
Yeah, you know what my daughter said the other day? She said, Mom, your family is so different. And they live all in California. So we visit a few times a year. And because my daughter is so attracted to them, I try to make an effort to visit more and visit my brother. And she's like, I noticed something, and we're Armenian. And so she says, I noticed something between your family and the Americans. Well, obviously generalization by a 17-year-old. She says, when I tell, an American family member that, I failed the test or my teacher is negative, blah, 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 something negative, like some problem. They said, she's like, they wallow in that pain and they're like, oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Or you don't have the best. But she says, but your family, your brother, members of your family, they say uplifting, positive, encouraging, more resilient messages that, hey, it's up to you to change that. Can you work harder? She's like, I noticed the difference.
That's fascinating.
And I said, well, maybe you should write your college essay about this. She's like, no, I'm not. I'm writing about something else. I'm like, okay, I should take my own advice. Never tell your kids what they should do.
I know.
But it's interesting, exposing them to different people is so important.
I mean, the question is, do you think that that's just your family culture? Is it something about Armenian culture, or is it the culture of Armenians who immigrated, right? Like immigrants.
It could be, yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, immigrants, I think, have to be very optimistic people who are always believing that you can make your own life better.
Well, that's a really good question. So I also wonder that, is it because we're immigrants? Is it because we're Armenians? Is it my own culture? It's all, right? It's all of it and none of it, probably. But, I mean, what's the likelihood? My first cousin is an Olympian, like all of my cousins are high achieving. And it's not because they were affluent families, they came from success. No, the opposite. Most of us had nothing. It was lack, deprivation, poverty, hardship, and trauma that pushed all of us to succeed and to immigrate and do great things and, create a different life and that resiliency. But obviously, that's not everyone's story. Yeah, right? People are different on an individual level. So I love your book for so many reasons. It encourages thinking about those topics, but like you go deep and deep and deep and deep to find answers, but you find more questions.
I think when you're writing about something as complicated as family dynamics, you have to be humble because there's so many permutations and there's so many, I talk a lot about the role of luck in this book. I mean, there's this example of two identical twins who are both qualified to win this scholarship to a citizenship program called Girls State. It's a leadership program. And the woman who was choosing the kids from the high school who were going to go decided she didn't think that both identical twins should go. And so she decided to just flip a coin. And what that meant is that the young woman who won the coin toss went to Girls State. She was so successful there. She went to Girls Nation, which is a national competition. She got to visit the White House, met very influential people there and could see herself there. And so when she graduated from law school, she left home, moved to DC and started working. Ended up, by the time she was 30, she was flying around with a congressman, meeting heads of state. Her sister, her identical twin, who didn't have all those opportunities, was forging a brilliant career. But because of the family culture, while she was living in Kansas City, they were a Mexican-American traditional family, she was kind of expected to live at home. So while her sister was traveling the world, meeting heads of state, she was 30 years old and living at home. So it really shows you how a coin toss made their lives so different. Now, they both succeeded at a very high level. The young woman who didn't win the coin toss went on to be the chief judge of the Ninth Circuit. She's done pretty well for herself. The one who did win the coin toss was very inner circle in the Clinton administration and now runs the single biggest Latino civil rights organization in the country. They're just this powerhouse pair of twins. But in terms of their quality of life and the experiences they had up until they were age 30, that coin toss was tremendous.
Yeah, I agree. Luck plays a role. I mean, whether we want to believe it or not. And I also don't believe in free will. That's a whole different philosophical discussion. The circumstances, your genetics, who you are, what influenced you, what messages you heard, like it all plays a role.
For sure. Yeah.
You can hear something like you witnessed that family when you were a child, how they were engaging, and that shaped you a lot, right? Even maybe you can credit this book, this work that you've done, that interest that was cultivated.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think I would have nearly been as interested in the subject had my parents not gone away for weeks. And it's very unusual as a kid to embed with another family that's kind of like yours, but just different enough that you really notice. And again, it was 10 days at a time, 2 weeks at a time. So, you become kind of invisible at a certain point. And yeah, I can't explain it, but it was very formative for me, not necessarily the enrichment, but just seeing how different families were and seeing how some families were really making a concerted effort to cultivate a certain level of performance.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that in my own family. When my daughter was little, we used to do words and SAT words, but like when she was little, we call it SAT words. And she's so, she was always high achieving in terms of vocabulary and language. She was several grades ahead. But it came naturally to us. We didn't set up to do that, right? We're readers. We love it. Like my husband reads the Constitution at the dinner table. Like we're probably similar to that weird family in some kind of way, but we do our own thing, right? Some other families do their own thing. I think honoring the differences and knowing who you are and not sweating the small stuff and trying to change who you are, because it's about the values that you want to convey to your children ultimately. And you don't want to fake or force something that is not natural to you. That wouldn't come out right, right? It wouldn't be.
I would say two things about that. One is if it doesn't feel comfortable to you to do math problems at the table, like your kid's going to kids have very, very sensitive BS detectors. And so a lot of parenting advice, I think when parents try to do it, it's like almost counterproductive because the kids can smell off of them that it's not authentic to who they are. But also, if you have a kid who really hates doing math problems at the table and you decide this is your family culture, like it's really going to get you nowhere. You have to know your kid. And my husband and I love, literature, and we thought it'd be fun. We have twin boys when they were probably about 12 to just sit down one day, an hour and a half, and read Julius Caesar. It's like the most simple of Shakespeare's plays. And it's about the kinds of things that young boys might young men might be excited about. And one of my kids was, they're fraternal twins. One was super into it, and the other one was just not having it. And okay, so here's our family culture. We think we're going to read Julius Caesar. Like, no, we didn't, because one of them hated it. And so there's only so much you can do in a top-down way. I'm not a big believer in making kids a certain way, in making kids do things. It just rarely works, first of all. Sometimes I joke I can barely make my kids make their bed, much less, become more high achieving than they're inclined to be. But I just think if it's not authentic to you and if it's not authentic to the kid, all the advice in the world is going to be lost on you both.
Yeah, I mean, their children are not bonsai trees, right? That we can like shape and manipulate and craft the way we want them.
It's a beautiful way of putting it. In fact, Alison Gopnik, who I quote quite a bit in the
Yes,
book
you
in two
do.
different,
Yeah.
she wrote a book called The
Carpenter.
Carpenter and
Yeah.
the Gardener.
Yeah.
We're not there to hammer nails into our children so they become a structure that we can admire. They're gardens that we cultivate. They're going to grow a certain way and you can water it and you can make sure it gets enough sunlight, but it's about helping them be the best version of themselves rather than matching some ideal that you have.
Yeah, but so what are the downsides of this like high achievement? I mean, that's not happiness, right? That's a certain type of success, I guess, viewed in the United States or in the Western world. But that did you uncover the downsides? Did people talk about it? What's the opposite side of this achievement and high performance?
Well, I was once listening to a podcast, an Ezra Klein podcast, and Ezra quoted somebody else who was describing most high achievers as people with an anxiety disorder that they have channeled very productively, right? Like people who really excel at a very high level often are driven and have, perfectionism that dogs them. I just happened to click on an Instagram excerpt of a talk that Diane von Furstenberg had given, and she was saying, obviously Diane Furstenberg, very, very high achieving. And she said that, you throw your heart and soul into a given project, and then after it comes out, you feel like such a loser. But she said, that's okay. Only losers don't feel like losers. And what she meant by that was that the people who are most high achieving are also the hardest on themselves. That's what makes them keep aiming higher. And it's really challenging. They're sensitive to feedback. They want to be the best. And, I think to succeed at the highest levels of the most competitive fields, there has to be some level of real pain and suffering and sacrifice that comes with it. That might not always be worth it. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of professional athletes, and they're the people that we admire and we aspire to, and they are the ones who are making us dream big and think we can, escape the boundaries of human limitations. But often those professional athletes are very limited people. They've only focused on this one weird specific thing. They kind of are bonsai trees of human beings, and they're not shaped like the rest of us. And they are, what happens to them when they stop competing at a high level? It's strange, the things that we worship sometimes, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And also, like, what I was gonna bring up is this intrinsic motivation. Some people do have that intrinsic motivation. Well, all children do, right? We're born with that, but then it gets eroded or killed by others in society and parenting and all of that.
And school and public,
And school and in the society. I feel like that's so important to nurture that and see that in our kids and follow that. That means so much.
Yes. And we do know that when parents get too involved in their kids in activities, like even with small kids, if they're working on a puzzle and a parent like jumps in to try to solve the puzzle for them, then the kid is less motivated to try hard on a puzzle like a few hours later. Like they see this. I'm sure that extends throughout kids' lives. When parents get too involved, it just turns kids off and it's demotivating. So it's just so interesting because it's sort of like we have this idea that like, oh, it's on me to make my kid high achieving. The more you think that, the less effective you're going to be in preserving your kid's own sense of autonomy and their desire to succeed.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I meet so many adults in my practice, the kids who were controlled by the parents were told what to do, how to eat, how to wear, what to wear, where to go, how to play, who to play with, like the control-based kind of parenting. They are the least successful. They're lost. They don't know what to do. They don't know to trust themselves or not. The intrinsic motivation is gone. They're demotivated, depressed oftentimes. They have anxiety. They have failed relationships. It all's come, it's rooted in childhood. It's interesting. Like, yeah, of course, you want to control their behavior. You want to control this and this and this so that it can be easy. You want to push them to succeed, but at what cost, right? It's like, is this serving you or is it serving your kids? They're going to have to live their life independently one day,
Yeah. And also, usually your desire to, even if you are successful, chances are you won't be successful. And all you'll do is taint the relationship along the way, which is the thing that you probably care about the most. I mean, I think a lot about a dad who I ran into him right when his son was going to college. And I knew his son was brilliant. And his father named a school he was going to that, frankly, I hadn't heard of. And when he saw the look on my face of like, oh, okay, he said to me, I fought with him every day to try to get his grades higher because I knew he had that potential. It didn't work. And now he's leaving. And the father run into each other at the gym. His father started like weeping, meaning he had ruined their relationship to no end. He had not gotten the results. And now it was over. You only get those 4 years with your kid in high school, and then they leave pretty much forever, So for me as a parent, that was a really big cautionary tale. And, I guess some parents have more compliant kids, but in my case, I just didn't think it was going to really change anything anyway. And they did great, and maybe they could have done even greater, but I wasn't willing to risk the relationship to try to make that happen.
Yeah. I mean, we have to help them set goals for themselves. Like we don't want to set those goals for them. We can only do that for ourselves and show them, what's possible. We can do things if we want to show them what's possible. Like if you want them to do certain things, like I'm learning a new language now. I'm 51 and I'm learning Italian. What does that? I'm not doing this to teach my daughter something, but she sees that, hey, my mom is young-minded. She never gives up. She's learning on and on, constantly working on a new language. Like, what does that teach her, right? I'm sure great things. We'll find out later. But yeah, if I want to do something, I should do it instead of forcing my kid to do it.
It's a great way to look at it. Yeah.
Last question. I mean, I'm sure you learned so many things, but looking back at your parenting, is there anything you would do differently knowing what you know from this research?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was not an overly intervening parent in general, but when one of my kids was a senior in high school, I'd been told by someone that it was really important that he take this one class, and he really didn't want to, and I really twisted his arm, and guess what? He put not a lot of energy into it and really resented it. And he gave up taking a class he did want to take in order to take this other class. And it was just a mistake. It was just a mistake. And I don't think it had huge repercussions for his life, but it affected how much he enjoyed his senior year of high school. And you only get one senior year of high school. So I've formally apologized to him about that. And it's just a reminder, like, try to make your kid do something. It will usually backfire for everyone involved.
Yeah, that's a good one. Obviously it didn't have big impact, but thank you for being open and sharing that. Any parting words, wisdom, questions for me, anything like that before we say goodbye?
I just think about this television anchor whose brother was also very high achieving. And she told me, yeah, people are always asking her mom, she even asks her mom, now that she's a mom herself, like, how did you do it? How did you raise us to be so high performing and to push ourselves? And her mom said, I don't know. I just loved you. I just loved that answer. I mean, there is no easy answer. So you might as well just love your kids,
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much, Susan. This was such a pleasure. And I highly recommend this book. It's so fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I love the diversity of the families. And yeah, so much to be learned from the families, remarkable families.
Well, I was really looking forward to speaking to you. And I'm so glad we had this time together. So thank you.
Great. That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you found this episode helpful and inspiring. Be sure to hit that follow button so you don't miss future episodes, and take a moment to leave a rating and review. It really helps others find the show. I would love to hear your thoughts and takeaways. Join the conversation in the Authentic Parenting Facebook group or visit the contact page at authenticparenting.com/contact to get in touch. Authentic Parenting is an ad-free show, and your donations is what makes this podcast possible. Support the show by visiting authenticparenting.com/support or becoming a patron at patreon.com. Your contributions make it possible for me to continue bringing you weekly episodes. And as always, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. Until next week, I am Anna Sewald. Thank you so much for listening.